Have you ever wondered what would happen if your past showed up on your doorstep? In today's story, a reclusive farmer faces exactly this when two children with haunting green eyes appeared during a storm. Hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from as we dive into this emotional tale of redemption that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. In the sleepy town of Oak Ridge, nestled among the rolling hills of Kentucky's Bourbon Country, a tempest raged unlike any seen in recent memory. Rain pounded the earth in angry sheets, wind tore at the countryside, and lightning split the darkened sky. It was against this ferocious backdrop that something extraordinary happened along Willow Creek Road, a narrow, winding stretch that connected the scattered farms dotting the landscape. Two small figures, barely visible through the downpour, trudged along the muddy shoulder. They were children, identical twins no more than 3 years old, soaked to the bone and trembling with fear. Their matching light brown curls were plastered to their foreheads, framing faces that, despite their terror, maintained an uncanny composure for one so young. Half a mile away, in the grand but weathered farmhouse that crowned Thornfield Estate, Maxwell Thornfield sat alone in his study. At 67, his once broad shoulders had begun to stoop, his face carved with deep lines that spoke of hardship rather than laughter. The bourbon in his glass, from his own award-winning distillery, remained untouched as he stared out the window at the fury of nature. The sound of frantic barking pulled him from his reverie. Duke, his German shepherd, a proud, intelligent animal with a silvering muzzle, was acting strangely at the door, pawing frantically and looking back at Maxwell with urgent eyes. "What's gotten into you?" Maxwell grumbled, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke these days, save to Mrs. Eleanor Garner, his housekeeper of 32 years, or when business required it. Duke's barking grew more insistent. When Maxwell finally relented and opened the door, the dog bolted into the storm. Cursing under his breath, Maxwell grabbed his weathered oilskin coat from the hook by the door and followed. The dog led him down the long, tree-lined driveway toward the main road. Through sheets of rain, Maxwell spotted Duke circling something. No, someone. Two tiny someones. "Good Lord," he breathed, quickening his pace despite the arthritis that plagued his knees. The children were huddled together, holding hands, their clothes clinging to their small frames. When they looked up at his approach, Maxwell felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Their eyes, identical, emerald green, and achingly familiar, stirred something inside him he'd thought long buried. "Where did you come from?" he asked, his gruff voice softening instinctively. The children only stared, shivering violently. Maxwell hesitated only a moment before scooping them up, one in each arm. They were light, too light, and cold as ice. Duke circled them, whining softly as if urging Maxwell to hurry. "Eleanor," he called out as he pushed through the front door. "Eleanor, come quick." The housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. At 65, Eleanor's hair had gone completely silver, but her movements remained spry and her dark eyes sharp as ever. "Merciful heavens," she gasped, taking in the scene. "Where?" "Found them on the road. Duke led me to them." Maxwell set the children down gently. "Get some towels, warm clothes if you can find any, and call Doc Miller." As Eleanor hurried off, Maxwell knelt before the twins. The boy's lower lip trembled, but he stood protectively beside his sister. The girl's eyes darted around the unfamiliar surroundings, her small hand still clutching her brother's. "You're safe now," Maxwell said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. "You're safe." But as the storm raged outside and the emerald eyes stared back at him, Maxwell Thornfield felt anything but safe. Those eyes had upended his world once before, and something told him they were about to do it again. Eleanor returned with an armful of towels and what appeared to be children's clothing, yellowed with age. "These were in the cedar chest," she explained, catching Maxwell's questioning look. "From when Liza was small." At the mention of his daughter's name, Maxwell's face hardened. "Call Doc Miller," he repeated, his voice once again gruff as he took the towels and began drying the children's hair. "The lines are down," Eleanor replied softly. "Storms knocked out the power all over the county." She knelt beside the children, her weathered face softening. "Hello, little ones. My name's Eleanor. Can you tell me yours?" The twins remained silent, though the boy reached for Duke, who had settled nearby, watchful. The dog allowed the small hand to pat his head, his tail thumping gently against the hardwood floor. "They're in shock," Maxwell muttered. "Get them warmed up and fed. I'll try the satellite phone in my office." The old farmhouse kitchen was soon filled with the aroma of chicken soup simmering on the gas stove. Eleanor had managed to coax the children into dry clothes, the faded, once-cherished items that had belonged to Elizabeth Thornfield, and now they sat at the massive oak table, their legs dangling from chairs boosted with cushions. "That's it, sweetheart," Eleanor encouraged as the little girl tentatively spooned soup into her mouth. "Good girl." The boy ate more eagerly, his eyes never leaving Duke, who had positioned himself protectively at the children's feet. "Strange how he's taken to them," Eleanor observed when Maxwell returned to the kitchen, his expression troubled, almost like he knows them. "Sheriff can't get out until the road's clear," Maxwell said, ignoring her comment. "Could be tomorrow. No reports of missing children, but he'll check with county services when he can." Eleanor nodded, studying her employer's face. In 3 decades, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor that others missed. There was something in his eyes now, a disquiet she hadn't seen since the day Elizabeth left. "They can stay in the east bedroom tonight," she said. "I'll make up the beds." "We don't know anything about them," Maxwell countered, but his protest lacked conviction. "They're babies," Max exhausted, "frightened babies who need shelter." Eleanor's tone was firm but gentle. "Where else would they go tonight?" Maxwell rubbed a hand across his face, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. "Fine, but first thing tomorrow, they go to the proper authorities." Later, after Eleanor had tucked the twins into the twin beds of what had once been a guest room, Maxwell found himself drawn to their door. He stood in the hallway, listening to their soft breathing, wondering who they belonged to and how they had come to be on his property in the middle of a storm. His gaze drifted to the closed door at the end of the hall, Elizabeth's room, untouched for 25 years. The room he'd sealed off the day he discovered his wife's betrayal, the day he'd looked at his 19-year-old daughter and seen only the reflection of another man's deceit. "They remind you of her," Eleanor said quietly, appearing at his elbow. Maxwell stiffened. "They're nothing to me, Eleanor. Just 2 lost children who'll be someone else's concern by tomorrow afternoon." But as he turned away, the emerald eyes haunted him. Not just for their color, so like Elizabeth's, but for something else, a look he'd seen before. In his mother's eyes, in his own reflection. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, a different kind of tempest was brewing. One that threatened the carefully maintained walls Maxwell Thornfield had built around his heart for a quarter-century. Dawn broke over Oak Ridge with a tentative pallor, the storm having exhausted itself sometime in the early morning hours. Maxwell rose before the sun, as was his habit from decades of farming life, though the bulk of the daily operations had been delegated to hired hands for years. He stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, surveying the damage. Fallen branches littered the property, and the old oak at the edge of the yard had lost a significant limb. The sound of small feet pattering on the hardwood floor turned him around. The boy stood in the doorway, still dressed in the too large t-shirt that had once belonged to Elizabeth. His hair, dry now, formed a halo of light brown curls around his solemn face. "You're up early," Maxwell said, unsure how to address a child so young. The boy said nothing, but pointed toward the refrigerator, then rubbed his stomach. "Hungry, are you?" Maxwell set down his coffee cup and moved awkwardly to the fridge. "I suppose I could find something. Where's your sister?" "Sleeping," the boy whispered, his voice so soft Maxwell nearly missed it. Maxwell paused, surprised. "So you do talk?" The boy nodded slowly, watching Maxwell with those unsettling green eyes. "What's your name, son?" Maxwell asked, kneeling to the child's level despite his protesting knees. The boy hesitated, then answered in that same whisper. "James." "James," Maxwell repeated. "And your sister?" "Lily." "James and Lily," Maxwell nodded. "How did you get to my farm, James?" The boy's eyes welled with tears, and he shook his head vigorously. All right," Maxwell said quickly, alarmed by the reaction. "No more questions for now." He awkwardly patted the boy's shoulder, feeling the small bones beneath his palm. The contact stirred something uncomfortable in him, a long-dormant protective instinct he'd rather leave buried. "Let's get you some breakfast," he said gruffly, turning back to the refrigerator. By the time Eleanor arrived in the kitchen an hour later, she found an unexpected scene. Maxwell at the stove flipping pancakes while James sat at the table, feet swinging, a glass of milk before him. Duke lay at the boy's feet, ever vigilant. "Well, now," Eleanor said, unable to mask her surprise. "Looks like you two have made acquaintances." "His name is James," Maxwell informed her, sliding a misshapen pancake onto a plate. "The girl is Lily. They're twins. Did he tell you where they came from?" Eleanor asked quietly, moving to help with the breakfast preparations. Maxwell shook his head. "Got upset when I asked. Thought it best to leave it for now." Eleanor studied her employer with keen eyes. Maxwell Thornfield hadn't cooked for anyone, not even himself, in the 25 years she'd worked for him. That task had always fallen to her. "Sheriff called on the landline," she said. "Roads are still bad, but passable. He'll be here by noon." Maxwell nodded, his expression unreadable as he placed the plate of pancakes before James. "Good. The sooner we get this sorted, the better." Lily appeared in the doorway then, thumb in her mouth, her free hand clutching a blanket she'd brought from the bed. Unlike her brother, she seemed wary of everyone in the room except Duke, who immediately padded over to her and nuzzled her small hand. "Good morning, Lily," Eleanor said gently. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" The girl nodded, her eyes, identical to her brother's, never leaving the dog. "She likes dogs," James offered, his voice a little stronger now. "Mama's dog was big like this one." Maxwell and Eleanor exchanged glances. It was the first mention of a parent. "Your mama has a dog?" Eleanor prompted carefully. James nodded, his expression solemn. She had to go away." "Where did she go?" Maxwell asked, his voice gentler than Eleanor had heard in years. James looked down at his plate. "To heaven. That's what the lady said." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by Duke's soft whine as he sat protectively beside Lily. Maxwell turned back to the stove, his shoulders rigid. "Eleanor, get the girl some breakfast." But as he cracked another egg into the bowl, his hands trembled ever so slightly, a detail not lost on the watchful housekeeper. Sheriff Tom Miller arrived shortly after noon, his police cruiser leaving muddy tracks on the long driveway. At 53, he had the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors, his salt and pepper hair cropped close, his blue eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. He'd known Maxwell since high school. They played football together, chased the same girls, shared the same dreams of escaping Oak Ridge. But where Maxwell had left for college and the wider world before reluctantly returning to take over the family business, Tom had never managed to leave. "So these are our little wanderers," he said, crouching before the twins, who sat side by side on the living room sofa. Lily shrank back, while James regarded the sheriff with solemn curiosity. "Found them last night during the worst of the storm," Maxwell explained, standing with arms crossed by the fireplace. "Dog led me to them." Sheriff Miller nodded, his expression thoughtful. "No reports of missing children matching their description. Not in this county, at least." He turned back to the twins. "Can you tell me your full name, son? Last name, too." James glanced at his sister, then at Maxwell, as if seeking permission. When Maxwell nodded, the boy spoke softly. "James Carter." "She's Lily Carter," the sheriff repeated, jotting in his notebook. "And how old are you, James?" 3. James held up 3 small fingers. "And a half." Sheriff Miller smiled. "That half is important, isn't it?" Then, more seriously, "Do you remember where you live, James? With your mama?" "Not anymore," James whispered, looking down at his hands. "The lady took us on a long drive." "What lady?" Maxwell interjected, leaning forward. "The one who helped Mama." Lily spoke for the first time, her voice even softer than her brother's. "When Mama got sick." Eleanor, who had been quietly observing from a corner chair, exchanged glances with Maxwell. The story was becoming clearer and sadder. "Do you remember the lady's name?" Sheriff Miller asked gently. Both children shook their heads. "She had red hair," James offered, "and a star on her wrist." "A tattoo," Sheriff Miller murmured, making another note. "All right, that's something. Did this lady bring you here, to Mr. Thornfield's farm?" "She stopped the car," Lily said, becoming more animated. "Said we had to walk the rest of the way. That Duke would find us." Maxwell stiffened. How would she know about Duke? Sheriff Miller looked up sharply. "That's a good question." He turned back to the children. "Had you ever met Duke before?" James shook his head, but Lily nodded. "In pictures. Mama had pictures." A heavy silence fell over the room. Maxwell paced to the window, his back to the group, his shoulders tense. "I'll need to call Child Protective Services," Sheriff Miller said finally, rising to his feet. "Procedure in cases like this." "And what happens then?" Eleanor asked, her voice carrying a protective edge. "They'll be placed in emergency foster care while we try to locate family," the sheriff explained. "Could take some time, especially without more information." "Foster care?" Maxwell turned abruptly. "You mean with strangers?" Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow at his old friend's unexpected concern. "That's how it works, Max, unless—" He hesitated. "Unless someone they already know is willing to take temporary custody." "Me?" Maxwell scoffed. "I'm an old man living alone. What do I know about raising children?" "You raised Elizabeth," Eleanor said quietly. The room went still at the mention of Maxwell's daughter. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "That was different," Maxwell said through clenched teeth. "And it was a long time ago. Besides," Sheriff Miller interjected diplomatically, "it would require a home evaluation, background checks. The process takes time." "How much time?" Eleanor asked. "Days. Maybe weeks, given the holiday season coming up. Bureaucracy slows down around Christmas." Maxwell ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of frustration familiar to those who knew him well. His gaze drifted to the twins, who were now leaning against each other, Lily's head on James's shoulder, both watching the adults with those remarkable green eyes. "Fine," he said suddenly. "They can stay until you sort this out. It's a big house. They're no trouble." The sheriff and Eleanor stared at him in astonishment. "Max," Sheriff Miller began, "you don't have to." "I said it's fine, Tom." Maxwell's tone brooked no argument. "Start your paperwork. Do what you need to do. Meanwhile, they'll be safe here." The next morning brought a clear sky and temperatures that plummeted overnight, typical of Kentucky in late November. Maxwell woke to the unfamiliar sound of childish laughter floating up from the first floor. For a moment, he lay in bed, disoriented by the sound in this house that had known so little joy for decades. Downstairs, he found Eleanor at the kitchen table, supervising as the twins used cookie cutters on rolled-out dough. Flour dusted nearly every surface, including the children's faces and Eleanor's usually immaculate apron. "What's all this?" Maxwell asked, pouring himself coffee from the pot Eleanor always had ready by 6. "Biscuits for breakfast," Eleanor replied, her eyes twinkling. "Our young guests are quite the helpers." "Look," James held up a star-shaped piece of dough. "For Christmas." "Christmas is still a month away," Maxwell said, then immediately regretted his gruff tone when James's smile faltered. "It's never too early to think about Christmas," Eleanor said diplomatically. "The children were telling me about their traditions with their mother. They'd bake cookies shaped like stars." Maxwell nodded awkwardly and retreated to his study with his coffee. Through the window, he could see his foreman, Mike Doherty, directing workers in clearing debris from the storm. The distillery, visible on the eastern edge of the property, appeared to have weathered the tempest without significant damage. His satellite phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Doc Miller, Tom's older brother and the town's only physician for the past 30 years. "Tom told me about your house guests," John Miller said without preamble. "I'm stopping by this afternoon to check on them." "They're fine," Maxwell said. "No injuries that I can see." "I'm sure they are," John replied patiently. "But it's standard procedure in cases like this. Children found abandoned need medical clearance." After hanging up, Maxwell sat heavily in his leather chair, the word abandoned echoing in his mind. It stirred memories he'd spent years suppressing. Elizabeth's face the day he'd told her to leave and never come back. The hurt and confusion in her eyes when he'd refused to believe her denials about the pregnancy. "Mr. Maxwell?" A small voice interrupted his brooding. James stood in the doorway of the study, a flower handprint on his borrowed t-shirt. "Mrs. Eleanor says breakfast is ready." Maxwell nodded, setting down his cup. "Thank you, James." "Can Duke come too?" the boy asked hopefully. "Duke eats in the mudroom," Maxwell replied, but seeing disappointment cloud the boy's face, he found himself adding, "But I suppose today he could join us in the kitchen." James's face lit up. "I'll tell him." He scampered off, leaving Maxwell to wonder when he'd started making exceptions to house rules that had stood for 20 years. Breakfast was a surprisingly pleasant affair. The star-shaped biscuits were a bit misshapen, but warm and buttery. Lily, who had remained largely silent around Maxwell, actually giggled when he used a biscuit to make a mustache above his lip. "You look silly," she declared, then immediately ducked her head, as if expecting a rebuke. "Yes, I suppose I do," Maxwell agreed, surprised by the smile tugging at his own lips. After breakfast, while Eleanor washed the dishes with the twins perched on stools helping to dry, Maxwell retreated to his office to call his lawyer. If the children were to stay even temporarily, there would be paperwork, legalities to navigate. "Christmas is coming," he heard James declare from the kitchen. "Will there be a tree?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying down the hall. "We haven't had a Christmas tree here in a long time." Maxwell's hand hovered over the phone as an unexpected memory surfaced. Elizabeth at 7, standing on tiptoe to hang an ornament on the top branches, her green eyes sparkling with delight. The same eyes as the twins. "Curious coincidence," he muttered to himself, trying to dismiss the nagging feeling that these children's appearance on his property was anything but random. The red-headed woman with the star tattoo, who somehow knew about Duke. What was her connection to all this? Later, as Doc Miller examined the twins in the parlor, Maxwell found himself hovering nearby, oddly anxious about the verdict. "Healthy as can be," the doctor announced finally, packing his stethoscope. "A bit underweight perhaps, but nothing concerning." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "They've been well cared for. Max, someone loved these children very much." Maxwell nodded, relief washing over him for reasons he couldn't, or wouldn't, articulate. The days following Doc Miller's visit fell into an unexpected rhythm at Thornfield Estate. Maxwell found himself adjusting his long-established routines to accommodate the presence of the twins. His early morning inspections of the distillery now included detours back to the house to check if the children were awake. His solitary lunches in the study became meals at the kitchen table, where James would pepper him with questions about the farm and Lily would quietly observe, speaking only when directly addressed. 1 week after their arrival, the first real snow of the season blanketed the countryside. Maxwell stood at his bedroom window at dawn, watching the pristine white covering transform his property. A movement near the barn caught his eye. Eleanor, bundled against the cold, was leading the twins through the snow, their small boots leaving trailing imprints like breadcrumbs. Duke bounded ahead, diving into snowdrifts and emerging with his muzzle covered in white, much to the children's delight. Maxwell watched longer than he intended, something tightening in his chest when James fell face-first into a snowbank and came up laughing instead of crying. "They're resilient," he murmured to himself. "I'll give them that." The sheriff had called yesterday with an update, or rather, a lack of one. No records of the twins had been found in the county system. No missing persons reports matched their description. The search had been expanded statewide, but the holiday backlog was slowing everything down. "Could be weeks before we have answers," Tom had said. "You still okay with them staying put for now?" Maxwell had agreed more readily than he cared to admit. A knock at his bedroom door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Thornfield?" Eleanor called. "There's a call for you." "Sheriff Miller." Downstairs, Maxwell picked up the kitchen phone, noting the twins now seated at the table with mugs of hot chocolate, their cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Max, we may have something." Tom's voice crackled over the line. Woman in Louisville recognized the description of the redhead with the star tattoo from the bulletin we put out. Says her name is Sarah Jenkins. Worked as a home health aide. Maxwell felt a prickle of anticipation. And she was employed by a Dr. Elizabeth Carter until about 2 weeks ago. The name hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Elizabeth Carter, the twins' last name. "Elizabeth Carter," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "Max, I know what you're thinking," Tom said cautiously. "But it's a common name. Could be coincidence. What else do you know about her?" Maxwell demanded, turning away from the curious eyes of the twins. "Not much yet. She was a pediatrician with a practice in Louisville. Apparently she'd been ill for some time. I'm waiting on more details." "And this Sarah Jenkins? Where is she now?" "That's the thing. Nobody seems to know. Left her apartment. Phone disconnected. We're looking." After hanging up, Maxwell stood motionless in the hallway, his mind racing. Elizabeth Carter. A doctor, just as his Elizabeth had always wanted to be. A sick mother of twins with his daughter's name and those unmistakable green eyes. "Mr. Maxwell?" James's voice pulled him back to the present. The boy stood in the kitchen doorway, chocolate mustache adorning his upper lip. "Can we make a snowman?" Maxwell hesitated, glancing at his watch. He had a meeting with his distillery manager in an hour. "Please," James added, his expression so earnest that Maxwell found himself nodding. "Just a quick one," he qualified. "I have work to do." The quick snowman turned into an elaborate snow family, complete with a snow duke. Maxwell's meeting was rescheduled via a hurried phone call. He couldn't remember the last time he'd handled snow for any purpose other than clearing it from paths, but the feel of it packing between his gloved hands came back to him with surprising ease. "It needs eyes," Lily declared, breaking her usual reserve. "And a nose. And a hat," James added excitedly. "A fancy hat like yours, Mr. Maxwell." "Like mine." Maxwell touched his wool fedora, which he'd worn for decades. "The one in the picture," James nodded. "With Mama." Maxwell froze, his hands still on the snowman's rounded head. "What picture?" The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that Maxwell had noticed before. "In Mama's special box," Lily said softly. "You were younger." Before Maxwell could pursue this revelation, Eleanor called from the back porch that lunch was ready. The children ran toward the house, the moment lost in the promise of warm food. Maxwell remained by the snowman, his mind whirling. A photograph of him, kept by a woman named Elizabeth Carter, a woman who had somehow known to send her children to his farm, to Duke specifically. The coincidences were piling up too high to ignore, forming a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. That evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, Maxwell sat in his study with a glass of bourbon, the day's revelations weighing heavily on his mind. He'd called Sheriff Miller back, but learned nothing new. The investigation into Sarah Jenkins and the late Dr. Elizabeth Carter was still ongoing. A soft knock at the door preceded Eleanor's entrance. She carried a tray with tea and placed it on the desk before settling into the leather chair opposite him. "You've been quiet since this afternoon," she observed, her keen eyes studying his face. "Did the sheriff's call upset you?" Maxwell swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "The twins mentioned a photograph today. Of me, apparently. They said it belonged to their mother." Eleanor's hands stilled on the teapot. "I see. Do you?" Maxwell's voice held a bitter edge. "Because I'm not sure I do." "What are the chances, Eleanor?" "A woman named Elizabeth Carter, with twins who have the same eyes as my daughter, who somehow knew to send them here, to Duke specifically." "You think she's your Elizabeth?" Eleanor said softly. It wasn't a question. Maxwell stood abruptly, moving to the window. The snow continued to fall, illuminated by the security lights that dotted the property. "I don't know what to think," he admitted. 25 years of silence, and now this? If it's her, if she wanted to reconcile, why not come herself? Why send her children alone? "The sheriff said she was ill," Eleanor reminded him gently. Maxwell turned, his expression haunted. "If she's dead, Eleanor, if my daughter died believing I hated her, you didn't hate her," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You were hurt, angry. We all say things we don't mean when we're in pain. I told her I never wanted to see her again," Maxwell said, his voice hollow. "That I didn't believe the child she was carrying was any relation to me." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "And now, if these children are her children, my grandchildren." The weight of the possibility hung in the air between them. "What will you do?" Eleanor asked after a long silence. Maxwell sank back into his chair. "Wait for confirmation, I suppose. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, 2 children who may be your flesh and blood are sleeping under your roof," Eleanor finished. "Children who have lost their mother and been sent on a journey to find family they've never met." Maxwell nodded, feeling the burden of decades of estrangement pressing down on him. "I failed Elizabeth," he said quietly. "I won't fail them. Not while they're here." The next morning, Maxwell was up before dawn. He stood outside the twins' room for several minutes, listening to their soft breathing before heading downstairs. To his surprise, the kitchen lights were already on. "Mike?" he called, expecting his foreman who sometimes came early for coffee. "In here, sir," came a different voice, younger, female. Maxwell entered the kitchen to find a woman in her early 30s sitting at his table. Her red hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and when she raised her hand in greeting, he noticed the star tattoo on her inner wrist. "Sarah Jenkins," she said, rising. "I know I should have called first, but how did you get in here?" Maxwell demanded, instinctively glancing toward the stairs, thinking of the sleeping children. "Duke knows me," she replied simply. "And Mrs. Garner let me in. She's making up the guest room." Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. "That's why I'm here. I promised Liz I would make sure the twins were safe with you. Then I'd explain everything." "Liz," Maxwell repeated, the familiar nickname landing like a blow. "Elizabeth Carter was my daughter?" "Yes, Mr. Thornfield. Your daughter." Sarah reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. "She asked me to give you this once I was sure the twins were settled. It's her letter to you, the one she never got to deliver in person." Maxwell stared at the envelope, his name written in handwriting he hadn't seen in 25 years but would recognize anywhere. With trembling fingers, he took it. "Is she?" He couldn't finish the question. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. 3 weeks ago. Acute myeloid leukemia. She fought it for almost 2 years. Maxwell sank into a kitchen chair, the envelope clutched in his hand, as the reality crashed over him. His daughter had died believing he wanted nothing to do with her. And yet, her final act had been to send her children to him, an act of forgiveness he wasn't sure he deserved. "The twins," he managed finally. "They're my grandchildren?" Sarah nodded. "James and Lily. She adopted them as infants when she was working with Doctors Without Borders in Guatemala. Their biological mother died in childbirth." "Adopted," Maxwell repeated, processing this new information. "Not biological grandchildren, then, but Elizabeth's children nonetheless. And those eyes, those remarkable green eyes, just a coincidence after all. Adopted or not, she loved them more than anything," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "And they were her world. That's why her last wish was for them to be with you, the only family they have left." Maxwell stared at the envelope in his hands, the weight of it seeming far greater than mere paper. "Why didn't she contact me herself? During all these years?" Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "She tried, Mr. Thornfield. Many times. Letters that were returned unopened. Phone calls that were rejected." The revelation struck Maxwell like a physical blow. He remembered his standing order to Eleanor years ago. Any communication from Elizabeth was to be returned or refused. At the time, it had seemed the only way to protect himself from further pain. "I didn't know she was trying to reach out," he said, his voice hollow. "With respect, sir," Sarah replied quietly. "You made it clear you didn't want to know." Before Maxwell could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs alerted them to the twins' awakening. Moments later, James appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes widening at the sight of Sarah. "Miss Sarah," he exclaimed, rushing toward her. Sarah knelt, opening her arms as James barreled into them. "Hey, buddy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you." Lily appeared behind her brother, more reserved but clearly delighted. "You came too," she said, approaching more slowly. "Of course I did," Sarah smiled, drawing Lily into the embrace. "I promised your mom I would make sure you were settled, remember?" Maxwell watched the reunion with a complex mix of emotions. The obvious affection between Sarah and the twins spoke volumes about the role she had played in their lives. "Are you staying?" James asked hopefully. Sarah glanced at Maxwell before answering. "Not for long, sweetheart. But I brought something special." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather photo album. "Your mom wanted you to have this." Maxwell felt his breath catch. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand toward the album. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "She would want you to see it too." The first page revealed a formal portrait of a woman in her 40s. Elizabeth, his Elizabeth, grown into a striking woman with the same determined chin and piercing green eyes he remembered. Her hair was darker than in her youth, cut in a practical bob, but her smile was the same. Beside her stood the twins, perhaps a year younger than they were now, each grinning at the camera. "That was at the hospital fundraiser," Sarah explained. 6 months before her diagnosis. Maxwell turned the pages slowly, absorbing each image. Elizabeth in a white coat with a stethoscope around her neck. Elizabeth and the twins building a sandcastle on a beach. Elizabeth reading to the children in what appeared to be a cozy living room. A life he knew nothing about. A life his stubborn pride had kept him from sharing. Toward the back of the album, he found what he was looking for, older photographs. Elizabeth graduating medical school, her face alight with accomplishment. Elizabeth in a remote village, surrounded by children, clearly during her time with Doctors Without Borders. And then, unexpectedly, a much older photograph. Elizabeth as a child, perhaps 7 or 8, sitting on the porch steps of Thornfield Estate with a much younger Maxwell, both laughing at something off camera. She kept this, he murmured, running a finger over the image. After everything. She never stopped loving you, Sarah said simply. Even when she was angriest with you, she made sure the twins knew about their grandfather. Eleanor entered the kitchen then, stopping short at the tableau before her. Maxwell hunched over the photo album, the twins peering over his shoulders, and Sarah watching with tears in her eyes. I see you've met our visitor, Eleanor said, recovering quickly. Breakfast will be ready soon. Sarah, you're staying, of course. As Eleanor bustled about the kitchen, Maxwell continued turning pages, stopping abruptly at a particular photograph. Elizabeth holding newborn twins, her face exhausted but radiant. The day she brought them home, Sarah explained. 15-hour flight from Guatemala. She was terrified and exhilarated all at once. She was a pediatrician, Maxwell said, recalling what the sheriff had told him. Working with children. Sarah nodded. The best I've ever known. Even when she got sick, she worried more about her patients than herself. She lowered her voice. That's why she waited so long to tell the twins about you. She wanted to be sure that I wouldn't reject them too, Maxwell finished, the truth of it bitter on his tongue. Mr. Maxwell, James piped up, leaning against his arm to see the pictures better. Is that you? You look different. Maxwell glanced down at the curious face beside him. Yes, James. That was me a long time ago. With Mama, Lily added, her small finger pointing to Elizabeth in the photograph. Maxwell swallowed hard. Yes, with your mama. The simple exchange carried the weight of decades, of mistakes and regrets, of chances lost, and, perhaps, of new beginnings. After breakfast, while Eleanor entertained the twins in the living room, Maxwell led Sarah to his study. The unopened letter from Elizabeth sat on his desk, a testament to words yet unread, truths yet unfaced. I need to know everything, Maxwell said, gesturing for Sarah to sit. From the beginning. Sarah settled into the leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. I met Liz 5 years ago when I was hired to help with the twins. They were just babies then. She smiled faintly at the memory. I was going through nursing school, and she was supportive, even helped me study. When she got sick, I became more than just the nanny. I became family. When was she diagnosed? Maxwell asked, his voice tight. 22 months ago. By then, it was already advanced. She tried experimental treatments, went into remission briefly, but Sarah shook her head. About 6 months ago, she accepted that time was limited. That's when she started making plans for the twins. And that included sending them here. Maxwell couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. To a man who rejected her? Sarah met his gaze steadily. She never believed you truly rejected her, just what you thought she'd done. Liz told me the whole story, Mr. Thornfield. How your wife led you to believe she'd been unfaithful. How you discovered after the divorce that she'd been lying. But by then, your pride wouldn't let you admit you were wrong. Maxwell looked away, shame burning in his chest. It was true, all of it. When he discovered years later that his ex-wife had fabricated the affair to hurt him during their bitter divorce, he'd been too proud, too stubborn to reach out to Elizabeth and admit his mistake. She kept tabs on you. You know, Sarah continued. Read about your business successes, knew about your bourbon winning those international awards. She was proud of you, despite everything. Maxwell's throat tightened. And yet she never came back. Would you have welcomed her? Sarah's question hung in the air between them. Maxwell had no answer. The truth was, he didn't know. For years, he'd nurtured his anger, letting it calcify into a wall that kept out any possibility of reconciliation. When she got sick the second time, Sarah went on. She knew the prognosis wasn't good. She started writing you letters, dozens of them, trying to find the right words. Most of them she destroyed. The one on your desk is the only one she kept. Maxwell glanced at the envelope, still unopened. The plan was for her to bring the twins herself, once she was strong enough after the last round of treatment, Sarah explained. But she never got strong enough. In the end, she asked me to bring them, to make sure they were safe before I revealed who they were. You left them on a country road in a storm, Maxwell said, anger flashing in his eyes. How was that ensuring their safety? Sarah had the grace to look ashamed. That wasn't the plan. I was going to bring them to the door. But when we got close, I panicked. What if you turned them away? What would I tell Liz when I got back to Louisville? She shook her head. So I stopped about a half-mile from your driveway. I knew Duke was still around. Liz had kept track of that too. I told the twins he would find them, that he would remember the scent of their mother from the clothes I'd packed for them, things Liz had worn. A dangerous gamble, Maxwell growled. I know, Sarah admitted. I watched from the car until I saw Duke find them, saw you come out. Then I drove back to Louisville to be with Liz for her final days. Maxwell stood, moving to the window that overlooked the snow-covered grounds. The twins were visible now, bundled in winter gear that Eleanor had purchased in town, building what appeared to be a snow fort with Duke supervising. She died thinking her children were safe with family, Sarah said softly. It gave her peace in her final hours. Maxwell turned, his expression haunted. And now? What happens now? Legally, I have no claim to them. Actually, you do. Sarah reached into her bag again, withdrawing a folder. Liz named you as their guardian in her will. All the paperwork is here, birth certificates, adoption records, her letter of intent. It just needs your signature to make it official. Maxwell stared at the folder, the magnitude of the decision before him suddenly overwhelming. Taking custody of 2 young children at his age, with his solitary lifestyle, it was unimaginable. And yet, watching them play in the snow, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass, he felt something shift within him, a door long closed beginning to open. I don't know if I can be what they need, he admitted, voicing his deepest fear. Sarah stood, moving to stand beside him at the window. Liz said you'd say that. She also said to tell you that you already are what they need. A grandfather who can teach them about their mother, about where they come from. About the man who taught her strength and determination, even if he was too stubborn for his own good sometimes. A reluctant smile tugged at Maxwell's lips. She said that. Her exact words, Sarah confirmed, her own smile bittersweet. Mr. Thornfield, those children have lost everything familiar to them. But they've spent the last week settling in here, forming attachments. To this place, to Mrs. Garner, to Duke, and to you, whether you realize it or not. Maxwell watched as James tumbled in the snow, then got up laughing, just as he had the day before. Resilient, indeed. Will you at least read her letter? Sarah asked gently. Before you decide? Maxwell nodded, moving back to his desk. With a deep breath, he picked up the envelope and broke the seal. The letter was dated just 6 weeks earlier, the handwriting steady despite what must have been considerable pain. Dear Dad, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Sarah has fulfilled her promise to bring James and Lily to you. I hope you've had a chance to get to know them, even a little. They are remarkable children with so much love to give. I've started this letter 100 times over the years, but pride and fear always stopped me from sending it. Now, facing the end, I find those obstacles seem foolish. What matters is that you know I never stopped loving you, despite our estrangement. I understand now, as an adult and as a parent, how deeply betrayal can cut. Mom's lies destroyed something precious between us. For many years, I was angry that you didn't trust me enough to believe me when I denied her accusations. But time has a way of softening even the hardest edges of resentment. When I adopted James and Lily 3 years ago, I experienced a love I never knew was possible. They healed places in my heart I didn't know were broken. And in caring for them, I finally understood something. Love isn't perfect. Parents make mistakes, sometimes terrible ones. But love remains, underneath it all, waiting for a chance to be reclaimed. I'm asking you for that chance now. Not for me. It's too late for us, but for my children. They deserve family. They deserve to know the man who taught me resilience, who showed me that hard work and integrity matter, who read me bedtime stories and checked under my bed for monsters. The man who, despite his flaws, gave me the foundation to become the person I am proud to have been. Inside the photo album, you'll find a hidden pocket with a key. It opens a safe deposit box at First National in Oak Ridge. Inside are my journals from the past 25 years. I want you to have them, to know the life your daughter lived, and perhaps to share the stories with James and Lily when they're older. There is no obligation here. If you cannot or do not wish to raise my children, Sarah has instructions for alternative arrangements. But I believe, deep in my heart, that Thornfield Estate is where they belong. The farm where I grew up, the land that has been in our family for generations. This is their heritage too, adopted or not. I'm sending them with Duke's old collar that I took when I left. He was just a puppy then. I don't know if he's still alive, but if he is, I hope he remembers me through them. One last thing, forgive yourself, Dad. I forgave you long ago. With eternal love, your Elizabeth. Maxwell set the letter down, his vision blurred by tears he couldn't hold back. The weight of 25 years of estrangement, of chances missed and words unspoken, settled on him like a physical burden. From the window, the sound of childish laughter drifted in, a stark contrast to the sorrow gripping his heart. He moved to look outside again, where the twins were now helping Eleanor hang bird feeders from the bare branches of the old maple tree. The choice before him wasn't really a choice at all, he realized. These children, Elizabeth's children, were the legacy she had left behind. A chance for redemption he didn't deserve but desperately needed. He picked up the folder Sarah had left and flipped it open. The guardianship papers were on top, awaiting his signature. Below them were birth certificates, adoption records, and recent medical documents. All the practical artifacts of the children's existence, neatly organized in Elizabeth's methodical way. Just like her mother, he murmured, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. Sarah knocked gently before entering the study again. Have you decided? She asked, though the answer seemed to be written on his face. Maxwell nodded, reaching for a pen. They stay, he said simply, signing his name with a firm hand. I won't fail them. Or Elizabeth. Not again. That evening, after Sarah had departed with promises to visit often, Maxwell sat before the fireplace in the living room. The twins were nestled on either side of him on the sofa, still in their pajamas after their baths. Duke lay at their feet, his aging body stretched protectively across the hearth rug. Mr. Maxwell, James said sleepily, his head heavy against Maxwell's arm. Are we staying here now? Forever? Maxwell looked down at the small face, turned trustingly toward his. Yes, he said, his voice rough with emotion. This is your home now, and you can call me Grandpa, if you'd like. James's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Grandpa, he repeated, testing the word. Mama said you would let us stay. She promised. Your mama was right, Maxwell said, his arm tightening around the boy's shoulders. She was right about a lot of things. Is Mama in heaven? Lily asked from his other side, her voice small but clear. Maxwell nodded, choosing his words carefully. Yes, she is. And I think she's watching over us right now. Can we put a star on the Christmas tree for her? Lily asked. Miss Sarah said we should. Christmas tree. Maxwell glanced at Eleanor, who stood in the doorway with a knowing smile. The children mentioned wanting one, she said innocently. I took the liberty of asking Mike to bring one in from the north field tomorrow. Maxwell found himself nodding, another wall within him crumbling. Yes, of course. A star for your mama. The brightest one we can find. Later, after the twins were tucked into bed, Maxwell returned to his study. The photo album lay open on his desk, and he carefully examined the binding until he found the hidden pocket Elizabeth had mentioned. Inside was a small brass key, just as she'd written. He would visit the bank tomorrow, he decided. Read the journals when he was ready. Learn about the daughter he'd lost, the remarkable woman she'd become without him. But tonight, he had something more important to do. Moving to the closet in the corner of his study, Maxwell retrieved a dusty cardboard box he hadn't opened in decades. Inside were Christmas decorations from when Elizabeth was a child, ornaments she had made, stockings with their names embroidered by his late mother. It was time to make Thornfield Estate a home again, not just for James and Lily, but for the memory of Elizabeth. And perhaps for his own healing too. Outside, the winter wind had calmed, and snow fell gently in the security light's glow. Inside, for the first time in 25 years, Thornfield Estate was filled with the quiet promise of Christmas, of family, and of love reclaimed. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you've watched this far, comment, I watched this far, and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.